And now, a passage from Dutch and Swedes on the Delaware, 1609 to 1664, from chapter 17 of Prince as Empire Builder. While this orgy of building was going on, Prince was busy with the other duties imposed by his instructions. The fur trade was still the colony's main reliance, but agriculture must also be pushed. The free colonists were urged to clear and plant their allotments, and the hired servants, tilling the company's plantations, were driven at their tasks. Axes rang in the woodland, plows turned their furrows, corn and tobacco were seeded. Indians were enticed to Christina and the Schuylkill by offers of better trade than the rival dealers would make. There was trading with the Dutch and English too. Cloth, guns, knives, and other articles in variety were bought from them for the colony, and tobacco for return cargoes in the Swan and the Fama. Huygen went to New Amsterdam to buy goods. The two ships sailed for Sweden in April. Hollander went with them, so did Johann Papagoya, to supplement verbally Prince's written report. In the intervals of business, Prince reorganized the colony's government. He had full judicial and administrative powers. His judicial functions were to be exercised in connection with assistants chosen by him from among the principal and wisest inhabitants of the colony. But he determined the punishment, fines, imprisonment, or death. In fact, hampered only by the necessity of employing assistant judges who were both judges and jury, and whom he could select at will, Prince was an absolute monarch in New Sweden, exercising the high, the low, and the middle justice, with powers of life and death in his hands. No other colonial governor on the Atlantic seaboard of America was vested with such tyrannical authority. There were a few Dutch at Fort Nassau, but they gave him no trouble. There were a few Englishmen at Varken's Kill, but Prince had lined them up and given them the choice of swearing allegiance to the Swedish crown or evacuating. Those that chose to remain now lay quiet under the guns of Fort Elfsborg. From Henlopen and May to Sankiken, Prince was master of the country. All was well with New Sweden. The folks at home were well pleased too. Brahe, governor of Finland, wrote Prince expressing a hope that he will gain a firm foothold there and be able to lay so good a foundation in tam vasta terra septentrionali that with God's gracious favor the whole North American continent may in time be brought to a knowledge of his son and become subject to the crown of Sweden. Altogether, the position of Prince's little kingdom in the fall of 1643 was not unsatisfactory. He had not had time to instruct the natives in the Christian religion, nor to cultivate silkworms, but he had excluded the Dutch and English from his territory. To the Dutch especially, exclusion from the river was a heavy blow. Adrian van der Donck, a leading member of Stuyvesant's board of counselors, writing some years later, told a sad tale of Prince's offenses. First, he rhapsodizes about the country. This bay and river, he writes, are compared by its admirers with the river Amazon, that is, by such as have seen both. It is by everyone considered one of the most beautiful and the best and pleasantest rivers in the world of itself, and as regards its surroundings. 14 streams empty into this river, the least of them navigable for 2 or 3 leagues, and on both sides are tolerably level lands of great extent. Then he catalogues Prince's trespasses, that he had built at Varkenskill a fort called Elsenborsch, and manifests their great boldness towards everyone, even as respects the Dutch company's boats, or all which go up the South River. They must strike the flag before this fort, none excepted, and 2 men are sent on board to ascertain from whence the yachts or ships come. It is not much better than exercising the right of search. It will, to all appearance, come to this in the end. What authority these people can have to do this, we know not. Nor can we comprehend how officers of other potentates, at least as they say they are, yet what commission they have we do not yet know, can make themselves master of and assume authority over lands and goods belonging to and possessed by other people and sealed with their blood, even without considering the charter. And so he goes on. The Schuylkill was heretofore possessed by the Netherlanders, but how is it now? The Swedes have it almost entirely under their dominion. At Sankiken, the arms of their high mightinesses were erected by orders of Director Kieft, as a symbol that the river with all the country and the lands around there were held and owned under their high mightinesses. But what fruits has it produced as yet other than continued derision and derogation of dignity? The Swedes, with intolerable insolence, have thrown down the arms, and since they are suffered to remain so, this is looked upon by them, and particularly by their governor, as a Roman achievement. True, we have made several protests as well against this as other transactions, but they have had as much effect as the flying of a crow overhead. Prince might indeed look with pride on his work, but there were a few flies in the ointment. Crops were not good, for one thing. He complains that he got from the work of 9 men hardly 1 man's yearly nourishment. There was a shortage of animals. He had to buy oxen at New Amsterdam. Trade in furs was bad, yet many consumable supplies had to be bought. The supply of food was insufficient, and there was much illness among the colonists. 20 men out of a scant 100 died that fall, among them the Reverend Rioris Torquillus. As 10 of them were hired men, and 5 of them working freemen, the productive force was diminished 1/3, and there was a severe shortage of labor. Territory had been dominated, forts erected, but the colony as a living organism was greatly weakened. The year closed rather gloomily. Nor did 1644 open with much promise. Trade was at a standstill for lack of goods. The English and Dutch pressed their advantage and well-nigh monopolized the fur market. But in March, they were cheered by the arrival of the Fama. There were a few new immigrants on the Fama, the usual contingent of Finns, timber thieves and game poachers, 2 more unfaithful husbands, and a military convict among them. But as the death roll had grown to 26 and 4 went home with the Fama, the net result was a population of 98 adult men and a few women and children in all New Sweden. The colony was hardly holding its own in numbers, nor would one suppose that its moral tone was being perceptibly elevated. They were better off in material things, however, after the Fama's arrival. She brought a considerable cargo: saws for a sawmill, grindstones, millstones, tools, 200 barrels of flour, 20 barrels of salt, clothing, shoes, 10 hogsheads of French wine, 1 hogshead of brandy, cloth for flags, and 10 gilded flagpole knobs. Those forts had to present a cheerful appearance, even though the mouths of the settlers were down at the corners. Also, 250 copper kettles and 6,000 bricks, items to cause wonderment. The kettles, one may understand, were for the Indian trade, but that a colony now 6 years old, in a land where clay was to be had for the digging and bricks for the burning, should have to freight 6,000 bricks across 3,000 miles of ocean, that seems to need justification. A lively trade ensued for furs with the Indians, for tobacco with the Varkans kill Englishmen and other planters, and a good return cargo was loaded in the Fama. Prince's experience with agriculture had taught him the economic fallacy of raising poor crops of corn, which could be bought cheaply from the Indians, and buying tobacco at a high price from the English, which could be raised cheaply by his own men. All agricultural effort was now concentrated on tobacco. At Uppland, at Christina, and at the Schuylkill, 30 men were thus employed. Prince also gave attention to improving the cattle industry. The hogs and cattle which had run wild were herded, the sheep fenced in. Manufactures were fostered in cooper shops and blacksmiths' forges. 2 boats were built at Christina. The mill was busy grinding corn. Although he had not yet got around to proselyting the Indians and the silkworms were still neglected, the energy of this man-mountain had been effectively utilized, so he functioned in the material affairs of the colony, building, fortifying, trading, farming, manufacturing. If you enjoy the content being produced here on High Americana, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon, which is linked below in the description. Thank you very much.